And we learned yesterday the sad story about Elisha ben Avu or Acher. We had one halacha from him in Masechta Moed towards the end, besides the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos. And now the Gemara continues. And we're learning about Ma'aseh Meshach, Ma'aseh Merkava. So we're up to 7 lines from the top, 8 lines from the top of the page. So we finished discussing how Rabbi Akiva nichnas b'shalom. I mean, before he went in, he already had a strategy put in place on how to make sure that you're not overwhelmed by the Kedusha, exposure to Kedusha. Talking about learned. Shisha Devarim, the 6 things that Nemru b'Shedim that are said about Shedim. Shedim are demons, and the different reasons why they're called Shedim. Some say that Shedim come from the word Shodud, which means to be isolated. Some say that, remember before that, Shakai is Hashem's name, which says enough. And so therefore, Avadia Batanura in Pirkei Avos is the most fascinating thing. I haven't seen another place, but he says like this. He says in the Mishnah that David should create 10 things by Ben Hashmashas in Pirkei Avos. And one of them is Mazikin. And the Batanura says that Mazikin means Shedim. And he says, and I'm not going to explain what he says, I'll just quote you what he says. He says that the Eibishter was busy on the 6th day preoccupied with creating Adam and Chava and so on and so forth. He started to create the Ruchai, the Neshamas of the Shedim, but didn't have enough time before Shabbos to give them bodies. Therefore, they were sort of halfway between man and a Malach. And so therefore, Shedim is from the word Dai. I'm adding this part here, that Dai means that enough. He sort of, he was like, stopped halfway. What exactly that means, I have no idea, but that's what Rabbi Nura says in Pirkei Avos. Look it up, fascinating, on the Mishnah there. Then the Gemara continues. So Shedim are sort of halfway. 3 things, 3 features of a malach and 3 features of a person. What are the features of a malach? Yesh lehem, they have wings, the tossin, and they fly around, they travel around, one end to the other world, the yoidin masha osid liyas malach, they know the future like malach. So you want to ask, yoidin sagdat, what do they know, like what nevius? They hear the announcements behind the curtain in Shemayim Kemalach Hashadas. So these 3 aspects are similar to a malach. Adam, they have 3 similar to a human. About 15 lines on top of the page, we're talking about demons. That they have in certain respects are similar to an angel, in certain respects are similar to a human. In what way? Adam, they eat and drink like a person. Adam, they multiply. And they die like a person. Now there are 6 features said about a person. That in 3 respects we are similar to an angel, and 3 were like an animal. So all the ruchnistic parts of a person were like an angel. So that we have intelligence. We go on 2 legs and we stand erect like a malach. We're able to talk Lashon Kodesh. Because we're talking about all mankind, not just Yidden. We're talking about everybody. So we have the capacity to learn and speak Lashon Kodesh. And Lashon Kodesh is different than all other languages. All other languages are Shem Heskami, which means people made up that, if you see a horse, we'll call it a horse, and we know what we're talking about. But in Hebrew, when we call a horse a sus, it's not just a shemus kami, but human convention, we decided to call that way. The name actually has a connection to the life of the horse. The letters samach, vav, saf, samach, vav, samach, these 3 letters and the organization, the way it's organized, is the source of chayis, of life force for this horse. So Lashon Kodesh is very different than all the languages, but this is a language that creates the world, and every person has the capacity to learn Lashon Kodesh. Except we had in the Gemara Seit that Pare was not able to understand all the languages except Lashon Kodesh. But 3 respect for like an animal. Eat drink like an animal, party multiple like an animal, and then we excrete. We excrete. In other words, we have inside us, we have good and we have bad. And we excrete the bad, the feces. And the malachim don't have that. Everything they consume is only good. Like by the man and the Yuma, the Eden also didn't have any feces because everything they consumed was only good. Says the Gemara, anybody who investigates too far in the following four things is Rashi Loi. Rashi's version was Rashi Loi, which means the same thing as the other version of Ra'ulai. It's befitting Shalei Bal Rashi actually had a second shot in the Mishnah, which means Rachmanis on him. Better if he didn't come to this world. I understand what's above, the Raglei Achayis and below the Raglei Achayis and Mala Acher. And what's in the future? Fine. Elefonim. Who cares if he investigates what happened in the past? Whatever happened, happened. Rabbi Yechon, I've let them to Rabbi Yechon let them both say. Marshal and Mela was on this compared to a human king. He said to his slaves, Bonuli Paltrin Gedela, I want you to build this large, immense palace, al ha'ashba, on top of a tip, a rubbish tip. They went and built it, it's a beautiful building. He doesn't want people to remind him that this is built on an ashba. Same thing, let's not talk about what was here before the world. So what's the ashba before the world? So maybe because the pasuk says, the world was toyu v'voyu, it was chaotic. And that wasn't the kavanah. Therefore, I don't want to talk about a period when that wasn't the intention at all. The intention was to be this world, olam hatikun. Says it more further, if everybody can please mute themselves. Take one further. If you don't have rachmanis on the Eibush the rosh, by the better you didn't come to the world. Mai. What do you mean you didn't have rachmanis? Rab Abba is a mistakel bekeshes. Rab Abba says if you look, mistakel is more than just riyah. Riyah is to have a glance. Mistakel means to stand there and to look, or to try to understand. If you're looking at the rainbow, if you're looking too long at the rainbow, it's not a good thing. It's not the covet of Hashem. We'll see in a minute. Rabbi Yisrael says, if somebody commits a sin discreetly, if someone commits a sin discreetly, is first of all, he's embarrassed in public in front of people, but he's not embarrassed in front of Hashem. That's one way of looking at it. Furthermore, it's as if you're saying Hashem doesn't see what I'm doing. Nobody sees what I'm doing, including Hashem. And therefore, that's sort of apostasy. And that's why it's not a good thing. It's a terrible thing. Says the Gemara, now the Gemara says, I'm stuck with the keshe. If somebody looks too long, what do you call it? Look at the keshe. If you look at the rainbow, the chsiv, it says, like the appearance of the rainbow that's in the cloud. The Yom Hagesh in a rainy day, Kain Mara Hanoiga Sovi. This is what the appearance of light all around. Who Mara the Mus Kavod Hashem. In fact, a rainbow is a reflection of the covet of Hashem, and therefore, if you stare too long at a rainbow, it's not covered for Hashem. You can look at a rainbow, I guess, give a glance in order to make the bracha and so on, but not to stare in it. In the Drush, it says you shouldn't look at a rainbow because the rainbow reminds the Eibishter that he really wants to destroy the world, like it says Pasha Noach, but he's holding himself back because of the vow that he made. And therefore, it's as if you're looking at the world in a very negative way. Rabbi Yosef says, anybody who commits a sin discreetly is worse than if you do it brazenly. As if you're rejecting the Eibishter. Never it says, I'm everywhere. And it's as if you're saying there's no Eibishter here. And that is apokursis. So in a way, doing things discreetly, on one hand, we learned before, it's the Maila, as we'll soon see in a minute, that you avoid the Chil Hashem. But on the other hand, it's as if, it's the same reason we say that a Gandalf is worse than a Gazlan. Gazlan who brazenly goes out there and steals, he's not scared of anybody. But a Gandalf is scared of people, he is not scared of Hashem. It's not so. Rabbi Zokin said that Roya Adam, she gets with Gala, first see that Yitzhahara is too strong. We had this just recently. Is Yelech Lamokam She'ain Makir, so he should go somewhere where nobody knows who he is. And the Yilbash Chayim, dress in black, the Atash Chayim, and wrap himself in black. The Yasa Mashaliba Chayim, do whatever you want. Al Yechal Shem Shemai Vese, you won't commit a sin, you won't make a Chil Hashem. So we see on the contrary, doing Aveiz discreetly is better than doing it openly. Like Kasha, it's not a question. Had the Motzakar is if you can subdue your Yitzhahara and you decide to do it very discreetly, that's terrible. That means you're saying that Hashem is not here. If you cannot suppress the Yitzhahara, then comes along Rabbi Loyu or Rabbi Yisrael and say, you know what, go go to a place that no one knows who you are, so you avoid making a chil Hashem. Now, we learned last time, and the same thing over here, the machlek is what exactly means. According to Taisus and Rashi, it means basically that when you dress yourself in black, you go somewhere else where you're nobody, that in itself will take away your Yetzer Hara. We learned then, Rabbeinu Chananel says, what Taisus quotes Rabbeinu Chananel, is that no, it means actually, you have to do the Veda there, and then go back home. And so therefore, but you avoid making a chil Hashem. But Rabbeinu Chananel here, actually, if you look into Rabbeinu Chananel, he actually adds a few words, which really changes the whole thing. He doesn't give license even then to do an Aveda. What he says is, you're not ready to do an Aveda yet. You are ready, you want to drink and you want to be merry and have a lot of frivolity. And frivolity leads one to do an Aveda. Then go to another place, dress in black, and you'll lose the temptation to do frivolity. And if you do frivolity, it will never be to the degree that you'll do it in a place where you're familiar. So therefore, it won't lead you to do Aveda. So Rabbi Chananel wasn't saying that the lawyer was saying, go ahead and do Avedas somewhere else and avoid Shil Hashem. You're saying that by going there, you won't put yourself in a situation where you want to do an Aveda because so you go ahead and be merry, but you don't know anybody there. You're on your own. So therefore, it won't be the same. Different pshat altogether, a little bit different than what Taisus quotes Rabbeinu Chananel. Telling about it further, Dort is wieder nach Meni, da behütet nach Meni, das mit Turg mit Shlakish, the interpreter of Shlakish, anybody who looks too long on three things ain't of case. He will become blind. But Keshes, if you stare too long at a rainbow, with a nasi, at a nasi hadar, you shouldn't look them in the face. That's clearly here it says you shouldn't look them a nasi in the face. You avoid looking at uve koinim, and koinim during duchening you shouldn't stare at them. But catch the rainbow, the Chut says kemaria keshes shiva and b'yom geshem who marries mushka Hashem because you're looking at the covenant of Hashem that we just brought before. But nasi l'chsiv b'nasatum ha'idcha olav Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to give from your hoid, from your splendor on them. So therefore, there's so much kedusha there. You shouldn't be staring at them. And the third thing is that hamastakel b'koinim bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim she'ayim lo duchanim when they were standing on the platform of Baruch Yisrael b'Shem Feidish, they were using Hashem's name. So interesting. Rashi said before the reason why you're not allowed to look at koinim while they're duchening, we cover ourselves with the talis is because and they cover themselves with the talis because it says right here you're not allowed to look too long at otherwise you become blind. Taisus there argues, and Taisus because the Gemara clearly says it's only in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, and they use the Shem HaMefeidish. But the reason why you're not allowed to have a defect on the hand of a kohen is not like Rashi said because it'll attract your attention. You look at them, you're not supposed to look at them. It's because it'll distract you from concentrating on the bracha. And actually, the Mefarshim find it difficult to explain how Rashi will learn the Gemara here. The Gemara clearly says it's only in the time of the Beis Hamikdash.
Didn't we say over there that the Shechina showed al etzboi hakohanim?
The Gemara says right here only in the times of the Beis Hamikdash when they said the Shem HaMefeidish. Not in the regular duchnik. Says the Gemara further. But another thing that the Ben Nachmani, the Metugmei Shlakish one said, might deceive. It says in the pasuk that al ta'aminu bereya, do not believe in a friend. Tifchu baluv, do not rely on this officer. He said, what's pshat? Who's his friend? So before we had the friend is actually the Eibishter. Here he says. If the Yetzer Hara says sin, and he says, don't worry, the Eibush will be Meichel. Go ahead and enjoy life. The Eibush will be Meichel. It is Al Tamin. You should not believe for 1 minute. Al Tamin Bereya. Yetzer Hara. Who's Reya? Referring to Yetzer Hara. Never says Ki Yetzer Leva Adam Ra is bad. So Ra and Reya, the play words are the same thing. So here we're saying Reya, friend is the Yetzer Hara. Why do we call Yetzer Hara your friend? Anyway, and the last time we said that Reya actually means the Eibishter. So I guess every person depends who they feel closer to. Shnemet says the Ein Aluf ala Kodesh Baruch Hu. Who's Aluf? Aluf the Eibishter himself. No, if the Reya says it's one thing. If the Reya Yetzer Hara says, don't worry, the Aluf will be Meichel you, which is the Eibishter. And how do you know that Aluf is referring to the Eibishter? Shnemet says Aluf in the early after. that you called me Avi Aluf, that you are the leader over our youth. So talking about the number talking about David. Shema Tema Mi A made. You're going to say, who knows if I do an evade in the privacy of my home? So he said, we had it before as well. It says in the pasuk, that the stones of your house and the koiros base and the beams of your house, they will testify all the Vedic in the privacy of your home. So then it says, the stones in the wall will scream out, the kapis and the little splinters of wood, Yanena will respond. Chacham say, no, not your walls of the house. But your own neshama is going to testify against you. As it says in Pasuk, from what lies in your bosom, that your neshama inside you will guard what comes out of your mouth. What lies in the bosom of a person, that's going to testify. Not your neshama won't testify against you. In fact, your own walls will not testify against you. We had in Gemara Shabbos that every person has two malachim. It's these malachim who escort you all the time. They are going to testify against you. It says, "Ki malachav yitzavalach l'shmochot." Have these malachim that are instructed to guard you wherever you travel, and therefore So here we see again malachim with us all the time, and they are going to testify against you. And the Chacham say, "A varav shel adam be'idabois." Actually, your limbs, your goof will testify, even though your goof are the ones that are causing the aveda to happen, because your sham is pure, pristine. Your sham is a chelik alakam and mal mamish, doesn't want to do avedas, and your goof is what does the avedas. Nevertheless, your goof will turn against you, and it says, "Va'atem eidenu Hashem v'aniker," and says that you will be the witnesses, and you'll be with v'aniker. So you're going to testify to the Eibishter, that you yourself will testify against yourself. Saying about it further in the Mishnah. Okay, this finishes the sugya about Maisa, Bereshit, and so on. The Gemara now is going to relate to us the very first argument in history. Prior to that, there was never an argument. If there was, they sorted it out straight away. And Taisus even asked that he know from another Gemara there was an argument Shaul HaMelech David regarding whether David was actually engaged to Michal or not. We'll have a Gemara Sanhedrin. But there, everyone agreed with Shaul except David. So that's not called an argument. An argument is where it hasn't been resolved. So the Gemara is going to go down the generations and Chagigah that we have in the first parak, with the leaders of the different generations, how they could maintain the same argument. The first argument is to do with kabbanas. There is an Indian by kabbanas after shechting, before you shecht the animal, you do smicha. And smicha means you lean on the animal with all your might, and you say either a vidu if you have to say vidu, or if it's a shlomim, you say a praise to the Eibishter. We had a machlekes in Gemara Beya whether smicha is required. Two machlekes, whether smicha has to be takif l'smicha shchita. That was one version that according to the Beis Hillel, immediately after you do the smicha, you need to shecht, and therefore he says on Yom Tov whatever. And then you have Beis Shammai, he says that you can do the smicha. Hillel says you can do the smicha before, and therefore you can have the animal on Yom Tov. And Shammai says you take the smicha should be straight away, and therefore you cannot do it on Yom Tov because smicha is forbidden, as we'll see. It's muktzah, shus. You're leaning on an animal like riding a horse. You're putting all your weight on the animal. And then another thing is whether you even need smicha on mandatory kabbanas. Maybe we only need smicha on kabbanas that are voluntary, not mandatory. So we'll see the Gemara soon. So Yesh ben Yezer says that you don't do smicha on Yom Tov. You don't do smicha on Yom Tov because it's muktzah. And Yesh ben Yechanan, as Rashi said, this is the first argument that existed by Chachmei Yisrael. It. And the Yosef ben Yechanan, who was his contemporary, one of them was an Ab Bezin, we'll soon see the Gemara, one of them was the Nasi. Yosef ben Yechanan says, Lismach, to do smicha. Yeshua and Prachi Aim Shalei Lismach, not to be Seimach Hanyantiv. Nitayo Abeli Aim Lismach, yes, you should. The next generation continued the same argument. Yehuda ben Tabe Aim Shalei Lismach, he shouldn't. Shimon ben Shetach Aim Lismach, he should. Shmaya and Avtalion, Shmaya says Lismach, he should. Avtalion says Shalei. So the first three, you had the first person saying to be Seimach, and the second person said not to. The next two generations, the other way around. The first person, Shmai, in that group said yes, smicha, and Avtalion Shalei Lismach. Hillel Menachem. Hillel's contemporary was Menachem, and he wasn't there for very long. The Gemara will explain what's going to happen. They did not argue. So Hillel was such a buckling person. There's no argument with Hillel and Menachem. It's only Meshame came in and was very sharp, where the argument started again. In fact, Shammai and Hill themselves had 3 arguments, or 4, as we'll see, and then their students went further. Nichnas Shammai, then Menachem then resigned, and Shammai took over, and then everything changed. Shammai, the first one said not to smith. Hill said yes. Harishainim Hayesim, the first name in every group were the Nasi, and Shniim Lahem was the Ab Bezin. And the second one was the Ab Bezin. The only exception is Shammai and Hillel. That because he already said Hillel Menachem, Hillel was the Nasi, and Menachem was Ab Bezin. And then when it says that Menachem left and Shammai replaced Menachem, we already know that Shammai was the Ab Bezin and Hillel was the Nasi. So here, by the way, Shammai had a major position. He wasn't just Tani, he was the Av Bezin at that time. Says the Gemara, we learned the Braisa like that. Shloishim in 3 of the first groups, they said in the first group, the first 3 said don't do smicha. The last 2 groups, Hill and Shammai and so on, the last 2 groups, when Shai and Italian, is the first one. And the last 2 groups the other way around. They reversed the order. That the first person said yes, give smicha. Shiny in the first ones. The first name is the Nasi, and the second name is the Ab Bezin. The first name is always the Nasi, and the second name is the Ab Bezin. The Chachamim say that Yehuda ben Tabai, even though his name is mentioned first, he was the Ab Bezin, and Shimon Shatra, even though his name is mentioned second, is the Nasi. So okay, let me answer your question. So we're talking about focusing on Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon Shatra. Man Tanah, who learned the following Braisa, which we learn in Second Makis. Yehuda ben Tabai said, he sort of cursed himself out. He was trying to do tshuva. He was trying to say I should not see the Nechama of Yerushalayim, consolation of Yerushalayim, but it was unless I do tshuva. I once killed a single 8 zaymim, and somebody came along and said that this 8 zaymim, 2 people came along and said that Reuven killed Shimon. And then it turned out to be that Reuven never killed Shimon. In fact, we don't know if Reuven killed Shimon, but the Eidim were not present at the time. They were somewhere else. It's called Eidim Zaymin. And we do Kasha Zamam, but we do to them exactly what they intended to do to that person. But we learned Kasha Zamam, they intended to do. V'loy Kasha Asa. If the Bezin, on the one hand, Bezin had to paskin that Reuven is Chayim Yisrael. If Bezin didn't paskin yet, then these Eidim were found to be liars. Then there's no Eidim Zaymin. On the other hand, if Reuven was killed already, even though we have a kavachayim, if we killed Reuven, surely the Eidim should get killed. But we have a gzeres hakasuv kasha zamam, and we darshan v'loy kasha us. The Tzdukim didn't agree. They said that on the contrary, they said that if you killed Reuven, then the Eidim don't get killed because there's a pasuk nefesh ben nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai wanted to show the Eidim Zayim they were wrong. The Tzdukim they were wrong, so he went ahead and he killed his Eidim Zayim before they actually killed Reuven. He killed Eidim Zayim the way the halach is. Problem is, he forgot the other halacha that we do not punish Eidim Zayim unless both Eidim are found guilty. In fact, if there was 100 Eidim, then all 100 Eidim, the entire group of 100 Eidim have to be found liars that they weren't there at the time. He only found one Eid a liar and wasn't there at the time, and he executed him. And therefore, he did the mistake. So this is what the Gemara says. I killed Eidim Zayim, which I think the fruits were wrong. I mean, they said Eidim Zayim, they said Eidim Zayim do not get killed unless he killed the victim. And therefore, I did the right thing. You did not do the right thing. Your problem was you had killed an innocent person. You don't kill the Eidim unless both of them were found liars. And Tesa has an interesting question. We have a rule that tzaddikim, do not stumble. Able to make sure they don't stumble, because madhav the behemoths of tzaddikim like that, behemoths of Pinchas ben Yair, they wouldn't need to crop. They didn't give truma ma'aser and all that. So surely tzaddikim themselves. So how come he made a mistake? How was he able to make a mistake? Tesa lays down a rule. When do we say that tzaddikim don't make a mistake? Where the iser is on the object by treif. If the iser is on the person, the object itself is all right. The issue is on the person, then every person has free choice, and even if you make a mistake, you're liable. There's no protection here. Even in Yom Kippur, it's not that the food is usher, because the same food is mutter every Kippur and Motzei Yom Kippur. It's the person is not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, and therefore there's no protection there. Says about it further. So Shimon said you killed an innocent person. Because the rule is both the lake and not the name. You don't give the malchus, but both in fund law. You're the mishalim name, and same thing when it comes to commercial. You don't charge them unless both of them found to be liars. They weren't present. Biyad kibul all of Yehuda b'tabay she'einu malachah v'nei Shimon Shot. Now he decides I will no longer paskin unless Shimon Shot is present to make sure I don't make any errors. Every single day from that day onwards, Yehuda went to the gravesite of this particular victim. And he cried. Everybody can hear his voice, and he was crying. Everyone thought it was everyone thought that Yehuda did the right thing, and this Eid Zayman was the one who was crying in Tshuva. He said to them, it's my, you hear me crying, and I'll prove it to you. Tedu, tomorrow I'm going to pass away, and no longer in Koil Nishma. And you no longer hear him crying, if wailing. If it's the mace, he's still there. It's me. When he heard the story, he said, of course, everything what he said is true, but the proof is not a proof. Because just because it stopped the wailing, Dilma Pusipaisi, maybe once he passed away and they were buried in the same cemetery, maybe he went and appeased this Eid Zayman who was killed. Or maybe the Eid Zayman took him to a Din Torah in Shemayim. So now who does this follow? A Meir Chachamim. Yeah, I'm if you say it's a mayor who says Shimon Shatter was Ab Bezin and Tabai was the Nasi. Therefore, he was able to pass even though Shimon Shatter was alive because a Nasi is more powerful than Ab Bezin. So therefore, it makes sense why he passed it later on. He humbled himself. You know what? I'm going to wait for Shimon Shatter to be present. If you can say we followed Rabban Huzay and Yehuda Metabe was Ab Bezin and Shimon Shatter the Nasi. If Shimon Shatter a Nasi is more powerful than Ab Bezin, then what right does Shimon Shatter have to make this psak when Shimon Shatter should have allowed Shimon Shatter to make the final psak regarding the Eid Zayn? Yeah, but how can Ab Bezin pass when Allah was when the Meir Bezin was there? So how can it be? So that's really what I wanted to say, that maybe this would follow Rameh. My kibbutz Gemara says, what's that? Like my kibbutz no, you know what he means in the Kabul? The Amar he always paskin in front of Shimon Shatach. He always, because he was not really, he was the Abbez, and he always paskin in front of Shimon Shatach. Why in the case of Eid Zayman did he paskin without Shimon Shatach? Because Shimon was not around. If Shimon was not around, therefore he's allowed to paskin. But what he was makabel was, so if he always I guess presented his case before the Shimon Shatach. So what did he accept? He accepted the Amal Tzarufi, even if there's a bezin convening, and I'm not the sole paskening, I'm part of the bezin. So then I can do that even without Shimon Shatach. I decided I will not join the bezin unless Shimon Shatach is present on the bezin as well. The feeling is Tzarufi, I don't want to be part of it. Anyway, Yatsa Menachem Benichn. Who is this Menachem? Well, where did he go? Abai says, Menachem went and he became a tzduki. This is extraordinary. We're talking about the times of Tanoim. We had such kedoshim. So first we have a whole story about Elisha ben Avu, how he began, and we had to give all those reasons what happened to him. Then here we have Menachem, who was great in Elisha ben Avu, because he was the Av Bezdin of the entire Kal Yisrael at that time. Elisha ben Avu never made it to that level. But he was the Av Bezdin, and then he decided to become a tzduki, like Yechon Kohen Gadol. So this thing about OTD, off the derech, is not something new. It seems that then it was quite prevalent as well, at least this version of what happened to Menachem. Rava says, no, it's not what happened at all. Yotzel Avodas HaMelech, that he went to serve the king because he helped herders out, and as a result of that, herders decided to reward him, and he made him a minister, and he felt he can do more for Klal Yisrael. He actually was Moshe Nefesh. He gave up the position of Bab Bezin, and he could do more for Klal Yisrael as a minister, to be in Hurdus's, cabinet, so that he can make sure that Hurdus doesn't come out with his terrible decrees against, as much as possible, against Klal Yisrael. So, what a difference between these two answers in the Gemara. Tanya, I'm not going to learn. Yotzim Menachem was a melech. The Yotzim Mishmayin was with him. 80 groups of him. Women in Labush, Sirach, and he was dressed up in royalty. He took with him a whole entourage to make sure that he is safe there, and also to make sure that they keep Hurdus in line, in check. So on the contrary, he was a big tzaddik, and he gave up his position of Av Bezin so that he can do that. Says he went further. Amar Rav Shimon said, don't treat muktzah lightly in your eyes. Like muktzah would be, don't ride an animal on Shabbos, don't swim on Shabbos, don't climb trees on Shabbos because you might break a twig, you might break a twig to fix your raft, you might take a twig and hit your horse, and so on and so forth. So you might say, what's the likelihood of this happening? Do not treat muktzah lightly at all. What's the whole problem of leaning on an animal? It's only a shvus, only a midrabanan, and yet we're saying that you shouldn't do it on Yom Tov. We have a big machlekes. This is the very first machlekes we have. What's the very first machlekes about? It revolves around muktzah on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. It gives you an idea of how serious muktzah should be taken, and no one should treat it lightly. And the greatest, the Nasi and Bezin in each generation, between the two, there was this argument about muktzah. We call muktzah shvus because the whole idea of muktzah is resting on Shabbos, so it's a shvus on Shabbos. And so you see how serious shvus is. Says, why would you think otherwise? Why would you think otherwise? Of course, if the Rabbanan made a rule, that's how it is. There's the Gemara, shvus mitzvah itzachale. Now we're talking about a shvus of a mitzvah, the mitzvah to bring these karbanos on Yom Tov, and yet we do not bring the carbon because of shvus. So he's trying to say, don't treat muktzah lightly. I have a mitzvah, don't worry about it, I'll ignore the shvus. No, we don't. In fact, so the Gemara Hanami. In fact, we had the Gemara Psachim there that Pesach falls on Shabbos, you're allowed to do all the malachas deraisa. But if you're tamei and you need hazah to be sprinkled on, the Rabban don't want you to do that. You can't do it. Even though we'll do shechita on Shabbos, we'll do all these other malachas on Shabbos. So the Rabbanan, in order to show the people, demonstrate to people how strict the Divrei Chachamim are and how seriously we should take it, they maintain their issue that. Says the Gemara. Hanami Pshita isn't that obvious? The Rabban said, didn't. The reason why I'm telling you this is because not everybody agrees to my understanding of the machlekes. I told you the machlekes whether you can do smicha b'yom tov or not is regarding muktzah. Others say the machlekes is whether you need smicha. They're arguing about smicha itself, and the one who says you're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov, not because they say it's muktzah, but they say because that they held that any mandatory carbon that you bring, it doesn't require smicha. It's only voluntary karbanos, but not mandatory karbanos. Because where it's written the din of smicha by carbon shlamim, and they say you don't compare carbon chayva to carbon shlamim, and that's why I'm telling you that they're taking muktzah seriously. What I'm really trying to tell you is that the basis, the crux of the argument is regarding muktzah. So you're arguing about muktzah. Even allowed, if we're calling leaning on an animal muktzah, it must be smicha b'chol. Where do we learn out you're not allowed to lean on an animal? From riding a horse. When you ride on a horse, you put your whole weight on it. So if we say you're not allowed to touch an animal, you're allowed to pet an animal. There's no use of petting an animal. The issue is putting your entire weight on the animal because it's similar to riding. The Isaac that if you don't have to put your whole, just touch it, the mic of it, listen, then what's the big deal? Why is it muktzah? You can go ahead and be samech. Basically, ask a question. Speak to Eden the samach and let them go ahead and do smicha. The pasuk says. The next pasuk says, "And with samach yada reisha you should place your hand." Says the Gemara. What is it? Bnei Yisrael. First pasuk starts out dabla Bnei Yisrael. You should speak to Eden, and then a couple of psukim later talks about smicha. So Bnei Yisrael Samchin only men and not women. That's the opinion of the Tanakama. The Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shmuel all say Bnei Yisrael Samchin shus. But nevertheless, if they want to do smicha, they can. If they want to do smicha, they can. Said, in fact, Sochli Abba Lazar once told me, not my father Lazar, but this Tana called Abba Lazar told me, once he once had a calf of a carbon shlami. We brought it to the section of the women because we wanted the women to be involved. The Samchu Olav Nashim, they all placed their hands on the animal. Not because they had to. They last give them satisfaction of being able to do smicha because it was their animal. And therefore, they wanted to do the mitzvah, even though they don't have to. They were able to do. From here, Taisa brings the proof that women, they want to do a mitzvah, I say to my grandma, they can. And he goes further. So from here, you can see also that you can make a bracha, because the big machlek is the Rambam and Taisa that for women on the mitzvah they're exempt, they make a bracha. The Rambam says they can't. How can they say it's or whatever they can't? And Taisa the main time also he can, and he brings it an eye from here. it's a little bit hard to understand exactly how you see from here that you can actually make a bracha as well, especially if the problem is saying v'tzivanu. And it says you have to work it through and see how you see from here that they can make a bracha where you have the word v'tzivanu there. And he's just saying because nachas ruach b'noshim, we allow them to do mitzvah the pot. If you can tell me I have a problem. Even though women can do the mitzvahs that are potter from, but not when it incurs an avera. If you tell me that smicha means you have to place all your weight on it, which means you are working with the animal, there's an avera, you're not allowed to work with an animal or kach. Except obviously there's a mitzvah smicha, but if you don't have the mitzvah smicha, you're only doing it on a voluntary basis. How can they do smicha when at the same time they're committing an avera? You're working, putting all your weight on animals of kachim. Now, you have to put all your weight on it, because just you want to keep them happy. You therefore you're allowed to avoid the kachim. Doesn't this prove? In fact, you don't need to put it. You just touch it. You just pet it. So the Gemara says, and therefore the question is: so where's the muktzah coming here? If you're just touching it on the yom tov, well, you do need kochach. But we told the women. So what we told the women is, even though that in your state, because your situation, because you don't have a mitzvah, and if you put all your weight on it, you'll be even avera. Just put your hand, let it float on top. Just touch it on top. That's what we told the women. Says the Gemara, so so you, Rabbi Yosef, bring a proof from here that women, if they want to do smicha, they can. You bring the whole story. On the contrary, this story proves not like Rabbi Yosef. They didn't do smicha. All they did was they petted the animal, they touched the animal, they tapped it. That's all they did. So on the contrary, they did not do smicha. So what's Rabbi Yosef bringing a proof that if women did want to, Bnei Yisrael if they want to, they can. He says two things. First of all, the lekkel smicha klal. First of all, he said that there's no smicha at all. There's no smicha at all because of the problem that they have this aveda, so they can't. And then he said, "Oh, we wanted to give them nachas ruach, but we were limited to how far we could do the nachas ruach because of the isur of smicha. So therefore, we didn't go any further than that. But we see that if they want to, they can, where there is no problem of aveda." Over Papa says, from here we learn out that's Dodin Asurin. From here you learn out that since he says that Rabbi Yochanan said this thing over here proves that when we say that the Aveda of riding an animal is on top of that. Not the side, it's not one way of riding. But when it comes to smicha, it makes, when we see, we're talking, because smicha you can do on the side. And yet we're not allowing you to do smicha on Yom Tov. Those say you're not allowed to do smicha on Yom Tov is because it's muktzah. So we see that when we say you're not allowed to put weight on animals, it makes a difference on top or on the sides. It doesn't matter. So even though it's not common to ride an animal sitting on the side, you only sit on top. Nevertheless, it's all included. The same with a tree, even if you're climbing on the side of a tree, which is not the normal side, everything is included. So it's a dodin asuri. From here we see that sides are us. These are that's if you're going to say what that's dodin amutter. If you're going to say that's dodin amutter, lismoich it's dodin. Why don't we just do? Well, this is 2 years now. We'll just do this gear. So lismoich dodin. Just do the smich on the side of the animal. If muktzah is only on top of the animal, then do the smich on the side of the animal, and that's it. The proof that you wouldn't have benefit anything because dodin are us as well. So the Gemara says, Rashi says, we're talking about doing it on top of the animal, but doing it on the head. Since nobody rides, if it's dodin of an animal's mutter, then the head also. Nobody. If you're saying that only where the Isa started from riding an animal, so only that where you ride an animal is usher, then the head, nobody sits on top of the head. So the head would be mutter. So why don't you put the whole smicha on the head of the animal, not on the side, but on top of the animal, and therefore it'll be mutter. So it proves that the entire animal is usher, whether the part you ride, the sides, or the head, makes no difference. Now Rashi said, "Full time of dodin motorin." You want to say that's dodin motorin? Called the bahadi gava kigavadami. Anything which is like to the top of the animal, no matter where it is considered. So you want to do it on top of the head because that's what it sees in the pasuk. Since the top of the head is at the same height or the same level as the rest of the animal, that's different than the sides. The sides might be mutter, but the smich has to be on top of the animal. And true, you only ride a horse on the hump or whatever in the middle of the animal, but the head, because it's on level with the rest of the animal, would be part of the Issa, not like the Zdadim. And that's why if you hold that there's muktzah, if it's muktzah, then it's forbidden to do it on Yom Tov. That's the machlekes at least. Those that say you can be samich hold that you could because the mitzvah of smicha overrides muktzah. Those that you can't is because muktzah overrides the mitzvah. We'll stop here.